Gasping for breath and clutching her swollen belly, Grace Jenkins stumbled up the steps of Silver Reef's whitewashed church as the first drops of summer rain began to fall. Her wedding dress, painstakingly altered to accommodate her 6-month pregnancy, was streaked with dust from the long walk through Utah Territory's unforgiving landscape. The note in her hand, delivered by her fiancé's young brother just hours before the ceremony, contained only 5 cruel words. "I cannot marry you. Goodbye." The small mining town of Silver Reef, Utah Territory, 1878, had never seen such a spectacle. Townsfolk who had gathered for the wedding now whispered behind gloved hands, their judgment falling on Grace like the steadily increasing rainfall. "The Hathaway boy always was trouble," one woman murmured to another. "Poor thing," replied her companion, though her tone suggested more contempt than sympathy. Grace's tears mingled with the raindrops on her cheeks as she reached the church entrance. Her parents had disowned her when they learned of her condition, and James Hathaway had sworn his love and devotion with promises of marriage. Now she stood alone, abandoned by everyone who had ever claimed to care for her. The church door swung open, revealing Reverend Thomas Miller's concerned face. "My dear child, come in before you catch your death." Once inside the church, Grace collapsed into a pew, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The assembled wedding guests shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to stay or go. Some were already gathering their things, eager to escape the uncomfortable situation. From the back of the church, a tall figure moved forward. Preston Evans removed his hat as he approached, rain dripping from the brim. The young cattle rancher had arrived late to town, having just delivered a small herd to the Silver Reef stockyards. He'd heard about the wedding and had come to pay his respects, only to walk into this heartbreaking scene. "What kind of man abandons his responsibility like this?" Preston muttered to the blacksmith standing beside him. The blacksmith shook his head. James Hathaway never was one for facing troubles head-on. Heard he took the morning stage to Salt Lake City. Preston watched as Grace sobbed into her handkerchief. He had only spoken to her a handful of times since he'd established his ranch outside of town 2 years ago, but he had always been struck by her kindness and gentle manner. The thought of her facing such humiliation and uncertainty made his blood boil. Without fully considering the consequences, Preston strode down the aisle. The murmuring of the crowd faded as he approached Grace and knelt beside her pew. "Miss Jenkins," he said softly. Grace looked up, her tear-stained face filled with confusion at seeing the rancher she barely knew addressing her. "I know this isn't how you pictured your wedding day," Preston continued, his voice gaining strength. "But if you'll allow it, I'd like to take the vows that coward wouldn't." A collective gasp rippled through the church. "Mr. Evans," Grace whispered. "You cannot possibly—" "I can and I will," Preston said firmly. "No child should come into this world without a name, and no woman should face such cruelty alone. I'm offering you my name, my protection, and my word that I'll treat you and your child with respect." Reverend Miller stepped forward. "Mr. Evans, marriage is a sacred commitment, not a charitable gesture." "I understand that, Reverend," Preston replied without taking his eyes off Grace. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a partnership to a woman I respect." Grace stared at Preston, her mind reeling. She had exchanged pleasant greetings with the rancher at church socials and in town, but they were hardly more than acquaintances. Yet there was something in his steady gaze that spoke of reliability and genuine concern. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Preston glanced around at the watching crowd, then back to Grace. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because no one should face the world alone if they don't have to." Grace touched her rounded belly, considering the future that awaited her as an unwed mother. The shame, the ostracism, the struggle to provide. Then she looked at Preston, his honest face, his straightforward manner, his unexpected kindness. "If you're certain," she said finally, "then I accept your offer, Mr. Evans." The church erupted in whispers again as Preston helped Grace to her feet. They faced Reverend Miller together, an unlikely pair about to enter an even more unlikely marriage. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" The Reverend asked them both, his expression grave. "I am," Preston replied without hesitation. "So am I," Grace added, her voice steadier than it had been all day. And so, with the guests who had come to witness one wedding now watching another entirely, Preston Evans and Grace Jenkins were married. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words spoken with solemnity if not passion. When Preston slipped a simple gold band his mother's onto Grace's finger, she felt a strange mixture of gratitude and apprehension. As they walked out of the church as husband and wife, the rain had stopped, and a wan sunshine broke through the clouds. Preston's wagon waited outside, prepared to take his new bride to the ranch that would now be her home. He helped her into the wagon with careful hands, conscious of her condition. "It's not much," he said as he climbed up beside her, "but it's solid and growing. You'll be comfortable there." "I don't know how to thank you," Grace said, clutching her small bag of belongings, all she had managed to gather before coming to the church. "There's no need," Preston replied, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. "We'll figure this out together." As the wagon pulled away from the church, the remaining wedding guests watched with expressions ranging from shock to disapproval to grudging admiration. Mrs. Harriet Boone, the most influential of Silver Reef Society matrons, sniffed loudly. "That man has either lost his mind or found his calling," she declared. "Either way, I don't envy that girl the nights ahead in a stranger's home." The journey to Preston's ranch took nearly an hour, during which they spoke little. Grace was exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the day, and Preston seemed content to give her space to process all that had happened. His ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest but well-maintained property with a sturdy two-room cabin, a barn, and corrals for the cattle. A small kitchen garden grew alongside the cabin, and a creek ran nearby, providing water for both household and livestock. "It's lovely," Grace said, genuinely surprised at how welcoming the little homestead appeared. "It's a work in progress," Preston replied, "but it's mine. Ours now, I suppose." He helped her from the wagon and carried her bag inside. The cabin was simple but clean, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a small sitting area near the stone fireplace, and a bedroom visible through a partially open door. "You'll take the bedroom," Preston said, setting her bag down. "I'll bunk in the barn until we can add another room onto the cabin." "The barn?" Grace asked, alarmed. "But we're married now. I couldn't ask you to. You didn't ask." "I'm offering," Preston interrupted gently. "This isn't how either of us plan to begin a marriage, Grace. We're strangers to each other. I meant what I said about respect. I won't expect anything from you that you're not willing to give." Grace blinked back fresh tears, overwhelmed by this continuing display of decency from a man who owed her nothing. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll bring in some water and get a fire started so you can rest," Preston said, moving toward the door. "Then I'll see to the evening chores. We can talk more over supper." Left alone in what was now her home, Grace sank onto a chair, her hand resting on her belly where her child shifted restlessly. "What a day it's been, little one," she murmured. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but at least we have a roof over our heads and a man of honor to help us along." That evening, They shared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits that Preston prepared. Grace offered to cook, but he insisted she rest after the day's upheaval. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted as they ate, "but I manage not to starve. You can take over the kitchen duties when you're feeling up to it." "I'd like that," Grace replied. "I enjoy cooking, and it's the least I can do to contribute." A slightly uncomfortable silence fell between them before Preston spoke again. "I should tell you about myself, I suppose, since we've skipped the usual courting period." Despite everything, Grace smiled at his dry humor. "That would be nice. I'm 30 years old, born in Missouri. My parents died of cholera when I was 17. I worked cattle drives for several years before saving enough to start my own spread. Came to Utah Territory 3 years ago and established this place 2 years back." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "I have no family left except a cousin in Colorado I haven't seen in years. I'm not rich, but I'm not in debt either. The ranch turns a modest profit enough to live on and put a bit aside." "You've accomplished a great deal on your own," Grace observed. Preston shrugged. "Just did what needed doing. What about you? Besides what the whole town already knows, I mean." Grace flinched slightly at the reminder of her situation but appreciated his straightforwardness. "I'm 22. Came to Silver Reef 2 years ago when my father took a job as a clerk at the mine office. I've been working as a seamstress and helping with the school occasionally." She hesitated before adding, "James and I had been walking out together for almost a year. When I told him about the baby he proposed marriage, I believed he loved me." "His loss," Preston said simply. "And now my gain, if you'll allow it to be so." Grace studied him across the table, his lean, sun-browned face, the steady blue eyes, the capable hands that now held his coffee cup. Not handsome in the conventional way that James had been, but something more substantial about him, something trustworthy. "May I ask why you really did this?" she questioned. "The truth, please." Preston considered her question for a long moment. "Several reasons, I suppose. I've been alone a long time and was starting to feel the emptiness of it. I've been thinking about finding a wife, but I'm not one for courting and sweet talk. When I saw you in the church today, it seemed like Providence you needed someone, and so did I." "And the child," Grace pressed, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "Every child deserves a father," Preston said firmly. "I lost mine too young. I know what that absence feels like." He hesitated before adding, "My parents tried for years to have children after me. My mother lost 3 babies before they gave up hoping. I've always wanted a family, and I don't much care how it comes to me." The honesty in his words touched Grace deeply. "I don't know what to say, Mr. Evans." "Preston," he corrected. "If we're to be husband and wife, even in name only for now, you should use my given name." "Preston," she repeated, testing the feel of it on her tongue. "And I'm Grace," he nodded. "Grace it is, then." Standing, he gathered their empty plates. "You should rest. It's been a long day, and in your condition, you need your strength. We can figure out how this arrangement will work in the days to come." That night, as Grace lay in Preston's bed, now hers, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, she wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. In the morning, she had been preparing to marry a man she thought she loved. By evening, she was the wife of a man she barely knew, living in a home she had never seen before today. Yet despite the uncertainty, she felt safer than she had in months. Preston Evans might be a stranger, but he was a stranger who had shown more integrity in one day than James had demonstrated in their entire courtship. With that comforting thought, she drifted into sleep, one hand resting on her rounded belly, the other clutching Preston's mother's wedding ring. Outside in the barn, Preston arranged his bedroll on a pile of clean hay, wondering what had possessed him to marry a woman he hardly knew. Part of him couldn't believe what he had done, yet another part felt a deep conviction that it had been the right choice. He had always trusted his instincts, and today they had led him to offer his name and protection to Grace Jenkins, now Grace Evans. As sleep claimed him, his last thought was of the look in Grace's eyes when he had made his offer, fear mingled with desperate hope. He had eased the fear somewhat, he believed. Now he would have to find a way to nurture the hope. The first week of their impromptu marriage established a cautious routine. Grace took over the cooking and household chores, grateful to have meaningful work to occupy her hands and mind. Preston tended the cattle and worked on ranch improvements, returning to the cabin for meals and occasional brief conversations. They were polite to each other, considerate, but the awkwardness of their situation hung between them like an invisible barrier. Neither quite knew how to breach the gap between being strangers and being husband and wife. 8 days after their wedding, Preston returned from town with supplies and news. "People are talking," he said simply, as Grace unpacked the goods he had brought. "I'm not surprised," she replied, carefully arranging coffee and sugar in the kitchen cupboard. "What are they saying?" Preston hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Some think I've lost my mind. Others believe I'm some kind of saint. Neither is true, of course." He paused before adding, "James Hathaway's family has left town, sold their store to the Millers and headed for California, from what I hear." Grace's hand stilled on the package she was holding. "I see," she said quietly. "Does that trouble you?" Preston asked, watching her carefully. She considered the question honestly. "Not in the way you might think. I'm not pining for James, if that's your concern. I'm just sad to think he could so easily abandon not only me but his own child." Preston moved closer, taking the package from her trembling hands and setting it aside. "Some men aren't meant to be fathers," he said gently. "But I promise you, Grace, I won't abandon either of you." For the first time since their wedding day, Grace looked directly into Preston's eyes and saw the sincerity there. Impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For everything." Preston squeezed back briefly before releasing her hand. "I was thinking," he said, changing the subject, "we should start planning for the baby's arrival. I can build a cradle, but we'll need other things too." "You would do that?" Grace asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Of course. The little one will be here before we know it. I want to be prepared." He smiled slightly. "I don't know much about babies, but I'm willing to learn." That evening they sat together by the fireplace, making a list of what they would need for the baby. The simple act of planning brought them closer, giving them a shared purpose beyond their hasty marriage. "You think it will be a boy or a girl?" Preston asked, as Grace knitted a tiny cap from soft yarn he had brought from town. "I'm not sure," she replied, smiling at his interest. "My mother always said she could tell by how a woman carried, but I don't know if there's any truth to that." "You have a preference?" Grace shook her head. "As long as the baby is healthy, I'll be happy." She glanced up at him. "What about you?" Preston considered the question seriously. "I've always imagined having a son to teach ranching to," he admitted. "But a daughter would be just as welcome. I'd probably spoil her terribly, though." The image of Preston doting on a little girl with ribbons in her hair made Grace laugh, the first genuine laughter Preston had heard from her. The sound transformed her face, making her look younger and carefree. "You have a beautiful laugh," he said without thinking. Grace blushed, dropping her gaze back to her knitting. "Thank you. It's been a while since I've had reason to use it." "Well, I hope to give you more reasons," Preston replied, surprising himself with the sentiment. As the weeks passed, their relationship gradually evolved from awkward politeness to a more comfortable companionship. Preston continued sleeping in the barn, but he spent his evenings with Grace, talking, playing cards, or simply sitting in companionable silence. They learned about each other's pasts, preferences, and dreams, filling in the knowledge that would normally have been acquired during courtship. Preston discovered that Grace was well-read despite her limited formal education, with a quick mind and thoughtful opinions. Grace found that beneath Preston's quiet exterior lay a dry wit and a deeply compassionate heart. Neither had expected to find such compatibility in their arranged situation. One evening in late September, a month after their wedding, Grace was washing dishes when a sharp pain caused her to gasp and drop a plate, which shattered on the floor. "Grace," Preston called from where he had been repairing a bridle at the table. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, pressing a hand to her side. "Just a twinge. The baby's getting stronger with its kicks." Preston frowned, unconvinced. "You've been on your feet all day. Come sit down and put them up for a while. The dishes can wait." Grace allowed him to lead her to the comfortable chair by the fire, where he helped her prop her swollen feet on a stool. The pain subsided, and she smiled gratefully at his concern. "You're going to be a wonderful father, Preston," she said softly. "You have the instincts for it already." His expression softened at her words. "I hope so. I've been reading that book Dr. Crawford lent us about childbirth and infant care. There's so much I didn't know." Grace had been touched when Preston had sought out Silver Reef's physician for advice about her pregnancy. Dr. Crawford had been surprised but pleased by the rancher's interest, and had provided a medical text along with an offer to attend the birth when the time came. "It means a lot that you're taking this so seriously," Grace told him. Preston knelt beside her chair to tuck a blanket around her legs. "Of course I am. This child may not be of my blood, but it will bear my name. That makes it my responsibility and my privilege." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Without conscious thought, Grace leaned forward slightly as Preston's hand moved to cup her cheek. The moment hung suspended, full of possibility. Then the baby kicked forcefully, making Grace gasp again, and the moment passed. Preston withdrew his hand and stood, clearing his throat awkwardly. "I'll finish those dishes," he said, moving toward the kitchen area. Grace watched him go, her heart racing not from the baby's movements but from the near kiss they had almost shared. For the first time since their hasty marriage, she found herself wondering what it might be like to truly be Preston's wife in all ways. October brought cooler weather and increasing discomfort for Grace as her pregnancy advanced. Preston worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch for winter and the baby's arrival, which Dr. Crawford estimated would come in late November or early December. He completed a beautiful pine cradle, lovingly sanded and polished to a smooth finish. Grace sewed bedding for it from soft flannel and added a small quilt she had pieced together from fabric scraps. Together, they transformed a corner of the bedroom into a nursery area, stocked with diapers, baby clothes, and the various supplies they would need. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Grace said one evening as they stood looking at their preparations. "In just a few weeks, there will be a baby here. Are you scared?" Preston asked gently. Grace nodded. "A little, mostly about the birth itself. My mother had difficult deliveries." Preston took her hand, a gesture that had become more frequent between them lately. "Dr. Crawford says you're healthy and the baby is positioned well, and I'll be right here, whatever you need." "You won't be in the room during the birth," Grace said with a small laugh. "That wouldn't be proper." "Proper or not, if you want me there, that's where I'll be," Preston replied firmly. "I've helped birth countless calves. It can't be that different." The comparison was so absurd that Grace burst into laughter. "Preston Evans, I am not one of your cows," his eyes crinkled with amusement. "No, madam, you certainly are not. You're much prettier and considerably more opinionated." Their shared laughter eased the tension that had been building between them since that almost kiss by the fire. Later that night, as Grace prepared for bed, she found herself wishing not for the first time that Preston would join her in the bedroom instead of heading out to the barn. Their growing closeness made the separation seem increasingly unnecessary, yet neither had found the courage to suggest changing the arrangement. Grace knew that, as his legal wife, she had every right to invite Preston to her bed, but uncertainty held her back. What if he had come to see her only as a responsibility, a woman in need he had rescued out of kindness rather than attraction? Preston, meanwhile, struggled with his own dilemma as he settled into his bedroll in the barn loft. His feelings for Grace had grown far beyond the compassionate impulse that had led him to marry her. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, admiring the gentle curve of her neck, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, the quiet strength she showed in adapting to her new circumstances. But she was carrying another man's child, a constant reminder of the love she had shared with James Hathaway. Preston couldn't be sure if her occasional lingering glances and the warmth in her voice when she spoke to him indicated growing affection or merely gratitude. The last thing he wanted was to pressure her into physical intimacy out of a sense of obligation. And so they remained in limbo, their feelings deepening but unexpressed, separated by walls of uncertainty and the physical distance between cabin and barn. November arrived with the first dusting of snow across the Utah landscape. The cattle were gathered in the closer pastures now, and Preston spent more time at the cabin, making repairs and improvements to ensure it would be warm and secure for the winter ahead. Grace's time was near. Her belly had grown so large that movement was difficult, and she tired easily. Preston insisted she rest more, taking over many of the household chores he had previously left to her. He learned to cook simple meals, did the laundry, and kept the cabin clean, all while maintaining the ranch operations. One evening, he returned from checking the cattle to find Grace attempting to reach a high shelf in the kitchen, balancing precariously on a chair. "What are you doing?" he exclaimed, rushing to steady her. "I was trying to reach the special tea Dr. Crawford gave me," she explained as he helped her down. "My back has been aching all day." Preston frowned with concern. "You should have waited for me to come back. What if you had fallen?" "I can't keep asking you to do everything," Grace protested. "I feel useless enough as it is." Preston's expression softened. "You're growing a whole human being, that's hardly useless." He reached easily to the shelf and retrieved the tea tin. "Besides, I'm your husband. It's my job to help you." Grace sighed, lowering herself into a chair. "I know, but our arrangement wasn't supposed to make you into a nursemaid as well as a provider." Preston knelt before her, surprising her by taking both her hands in his. "Grace, listen to me. This isn't just an arrangement to me anymore. I care about you, about both of you." He placed one hand gently on her rounded belly. "When I said those vows in the church, I meant them, even if the circumstances were unusual." Grace's eyes widened at his declaration. "Preston," a sharp pain cut off her words, making her gasp and clutch her abdomen. Preston's concern instantly deepened. "What is it?" "The baby," Grace nodded, breathing carefully as the pain subsided. "I've been having these pains on and off all day, but they weren't very strong. This one was different." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Preston demanded, then immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I'm not angry, just worried. How far apart are the pains coming?" "I haven't really been timing them," Grace admitted. "Maybe every half hour or so, Dr. Crawford said first babies usually take their time." Preston stood decisively. "I'm going to fetch him now, just to be safe. Will you be all right while I'm gone?" Grace nodded, touched by his concern. "I'll be fine. It could still be hours before anything really happens. Preston prepared to leave, making sure Grace was comfortable with water, food, and everything she might need within easy reach. Before departing, he surprised her by leaning down and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised. The ride to Silver Reef and back with Dr. Crawford took nearly 3 hours. By the time they returned, Grace's labor had intensified significantly. The doctor examined her while Preston waited anxiously outside the bedroom door. "You're progressing well," Dr. Crawford told Grace. "The baby is in the proper position and everything looks normal. It will likely be several more hours yet, though." "Preston will be worried," Grace said between pains. "Could you tell him everything is all right?" The doctor smiled knowingly. "He's quite concerned about you, Mrs. Evans." "You found yourself a good man there." "Yes," Grace agreed softly. "Better than I deserved." Dr. Crawford patted her hand. "Nonsense. You both deserve happiness, and it seems to me you found it together despite the unusual beginning." Outside the bedroom, Preston paced anxiously until the doctor emerged. "How is she? Is everything all right?" "She's doing fine," Dr. Crawford assured him. "Labor is progressing normally. The baby should arrive sometime before morning." "And what should I do?" Preston asked helplessly. "Keep water boiling, have clean linens ready, and try not to wear a hole in your floor with all that pacing," the doctor replied with a smile. "Your wife asked about you. She's concerned you're worried." "She's the one in labor, and she's worried about me." Preston shook his head in disbelief. "That's women for you," Dr. Crawford said sagely. "Now, would you like to see her? She could use some encouragement." Preston hesitated only briefly before nodding. The doctor led him into the bedroom where Grace lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with perspiration. "Preston," she said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as another contraction began. He moved quickly to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here. What can I do?" "Just stay," she whispered, squeezing his hand tightly as the pain peaked. "Please stay with me." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Through the long night, Preston remained by Grace's side, wiping her brow, offering sips of water and providing what comfort he could as her labor intensified. Dr. Crawford worked efficiently, periodically checking her progress and offering reassurance. As dawn approached, Grace's pains became nearly constant, and Dr. Crawford announced it was time to push. Preston moved to leave the room, assuming his presence would no longer be appropriate, but Grace clutched his hand desperately. "Don't go," she pleaded. "I need you." Preston looked to the doctor, who nodded his permission. "If your wife wants you here, you're welcome to stay, Mr. Evans. Just keep at her head and let me handle the delivery." And so Preston remained, supporting Grace as she worked to bring her child into the world. He murmured encouragement, held her hand through each pushing effort, and marveled at her strength and determination. Just as the first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, a lusty cry filled the room. Dr. Crawford lifted a squirming, red-faced infant for them to see. "Congratulations," he announced. "You have a healthy son." Preston stared in wonder at the tiny being, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. The baby, this child who shared none of his blood, had instantly captured his heart. Dr. Crawford efficiently cut the cord, cleaned the infant, and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Grace's waiting arms. She looked down at her son through tears of joy and exhaustion. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Preston leaned closer, one arm around Grace's shoulders as they both gazed at the newborn. "He is," he agreed, his voice unsteady. "He has your nose, I think." Grace looked up at Preston, her expression filled with something deeper than gratitude. "Would you like to hold your son, The words struck Preston like a physical force. This child, born of Grace's body but not his seed, was nevertheless his son in all the ways that truly mattered. He nodded wordlessly and carefully took the swaddled infant into his arms. The baby quieted as Preston held him, studying the rancher's face with unfocused newborn eyes. Preston traced a gentle finger along the perfect tiny cheek, marveling at the miracle before him. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "I'm your pa, and I promise I'll always be here for you, Doctor." Crawford, sensing the emotional significance of the moment, quietly busied himself with cleaning up and preparing a medicinal tea for Grace. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked after a respectful interval. Grace and Preston exchanged a glance. They had discussed names but hadn't made a final decision. "William," Grace said softly. "William Preston Evans." Preston looked at her in surprise. "After my father," Grace nodded. "If that's all right with you, I thought it would be fitting for him to carry both your name and your father's." Too moved to speak, Preston could only nod his agreement as he cradled little William in his arms. After ensuring that both mother and baby were stable and providing instructions for their care, Dr. Crawford prepared to depart. "I'll check on you again tomorrow," he told them. "Send for me sooner if you have any concerns, but everything looks excellent. Mrs. Evans did beautifully, and the boy is as healthy as they come." Preston walked the doctor out, thanking him profusely for his assistance. "You've done a good thing, Evans," Dr. Crawford said as he mounted his horse. "Not many men would have stepped up as you did." "It doesn't feel like a sacrifice anymore, Doc," Preston admitted. "It feels like the best decision I ever made." The doctor smiled knowingly. "That's how you know it was the right one." He tipped his hat. "Congratulations, father." The word filled Preston with both terror and profound joy as he returned to the cabin. In the bedroom, he found Grace drowsing with William nestled securely in the crook of her arm. He stood in the doorway, taking in the sight of his family, for that was what they had become, regardless of how their union had begun. Grace stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching them. "Come sit with us," she invited, patting the edge of the bed. Preston joined them, marveling again at the tiny perfection of William's features. "He's amazing, Grace. You did something miraculous today." "We did," she corrected softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Preston shook his head. "I just held your hand." "You did so much more than that," Grace countered. "From the moment you stood up in that church, you've been my strength when I had none left." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I need to tell you something, Preston." A flicker of apprehension crossed his face. "What is it?" Grace reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "When you married me, it was an act of kindness and duty. I was grateful, but I never expected." She paused, gathering her courage. "I never expected to fall in love with you, but I have, Preston Evans, completely and truly." Preston stared at her in stunned silence, hardly daring to believe what he had heard. "You don't have to say anything," Grace rushed on, mistaking his silence for discomfort. "I understand if you don't feel the same way." "I just wanted you to know." Preston stopped her words with a gentle finger against her lips. "Grace Evans, I've been falling in love with you since the day I watched you making biscuits in my kitchen and singing to yourself when you thought I couldn't hear." He smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I just never thought you could feel the same way about the man who married you out of duty." "Not duty," Grace corrected, her own eyes filling with tears. "Decency, honor, compassion. Those are the qualities I fell in love with and the man who embodies them." Preston leaned forward, carefully mindful of the baby between them, and finally claimed the kiss that had been building between them for months. It was gentle and reverent, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, William stirred and made a small mewing sound as if announcing his presence. They both looked down at him and laughed softly. "I think he's reminding us he's here too," Grace said. "Smart boy," Preston replied, touching the infant's tiny hand. "Don't worry, son. We haven't forgotten you. You're the one who brought us together after all." That night, for the first time since their wedding, Preston did not sleep in the barn. Instead, he shared the bed with Grace, their newborn son in the cradle beside them. They slept with their hands clasped, no longer strangers bound by circumstance but partners united by choice and love. As winter settled over Silver Reef and the surrounding countryside, the Evans family established new routines centered around William's needs. The baby thrived under their care, growing stronger each day. Preston marveled at each small milestone the first time William focused on his face, the first real smile, the growing strength in his tiny grip. Grace recovered well from childbirth, regaining her strength and vitality. The love that had blossomed between her and Preston deepened with each passing day, transforming their marriage of convenience into one of genuine passion and partnership. Preston moved his belongings from the barn into the cabin permanently, and they expanded their plans for adding rooms to the house in the spring. News of William's birth spread through Silver Reef, bringing curious visitors to the Evans ranch. Some came out of genuine goodwill, others from mere nosiness, eager to see how the unusual family was faring. Preston and Grace received them all with gracious hospitality, though Preston was quick to send people on their way if he sensed their presence was tiring Grace. Mrs. Harriet Boone, who had been so dismissive on their wedding day, arrived one afternoon bearing a handmade quilt for the baby. After inspecting William and pronouncing him a fine specimen indeed, she fixed Grace with a penetrating look. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Evans," she said unexpectedly. "I thought your husband had taken leave of his senses when he married you. I see now he was simply wiser than the rest of us." Grace smiled, bouncing William gently as he fussed. "Thank you, Mrs. Boone. We've been blessed in ways neither of us anticipated." The older woman nodded approvingly. "And how is married life treating you both?" Before Grace could formulate a diplomatic response, Preston entered from the bedroom where he had been constructing a chest of drawers. "Married life is treating us exceptionally well, Mrs. Boone," he said, moving to stand beside Grace and placing a hand on her shoulder. "I count myself the luckiest man in Utah Territory." The genuine affection between them was unmistakable, and Mrs. Boone departed with a knowing smile, ready to report to the ladies of Silver Reef that the Evans marriage was, contrary to all expectations, a love match after all. As Christmas approached, Preston surprised Grace by bringing home a small pine tree, which they decorated with paper ornaments, strings of dried berries, and a star he had carved from wood. It was William's first Christmas, though the infant was far more interested in the colorful decorations than the significance of the day. On Christmas Eve, after they had placed William in his cradle for the night, Preston presented Grace with a locket containing a small photograph of the three of them, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Silver Reef the previous month. "It's beautiful," Grace whispered, admiring the silver heart in her palm. "Open it," Preston urged. Inside, the tiny photograph showed Preston standing proudly beside Grace, who held William in her arms. All three were smiling, a perfect moment captured forever. "So you'll always have us with you," Preston explained as he fastened the chain around her neck. Grace touched the locket reverently. "I have a gift for you too, though it's not as beautiful as this." She retrieved a package from where she had hidden it behind the sofa and handed it to Preston. He unwrapped it to find a hand-knitted scarf in rich brown wool. "I know it's not much," Grace said hesitantly. "It's perfect," Preston assured her, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "And very timely with the cold weather we've been having." Grace bit her lip, looking suddenly nervous. "There's one more gift, but I can't wrap it. It won't arrive until summer." Preston looked at her in confusion until understanding dawned in his eyes. "Grace, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Crawford confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have another baby, your baby, Preston." With a cry of joy, Preston swept Grace into his arms, spinning her around the small cabin until they were both breathless with laughter. When he set her down, his expression had turned serious. "I love you, Grace Evans," he said fervently. "You and William and this new little one on the way. You've given me the family I always wanted but never thought I'd have." Grace reached up to touch his face tenderly. "And you gave us a home and a name when we had neither. But more than that, you gave us love when we needed it most." She smiled through happy tears. Not bad for a marriage that started as an impulsive offer in a church full of scandalized onlookers. Preston laughed, drawing her close. "Best impulse I ever had." Outside, snow began to fall softly over Silver Reef, blanketing the little town in pristine white. In the Evans cabin, the fire crackled warmly as Preston and Grace sealed their Christmas promises with a kiss, their unexpected path to love complete. Summer 1879 arrived with blazing heat across Utah Territory. The Evans Ranch had flourished over the winter and spring, with Preston adding more cattle to his herd and expanding the cabin to include another bedroom and a larger kitchen. Grace had planted an expanded vegetable garden and added chickens to the homestead, providing eggs and occasional meat for their table. William, now 7 months old, was a robust, cheerful baby who delighted in exploring the world around him. He had Preston's blue eyes and a crop of dark hair that Grace insisted came from her side of the family. He had recently mastered the art of crawling, keeping both parents constantly on alert as he scooted across the cabin floor with remarkable speed. As Grace's second pregnancy progressed, her affection for Preston deepened. The man who had married her out of compassion had become the center of her world, his steady presence and unwavering devotion healing wounds she hadn't realized still lingered from James's abandonment. Preston's love for William, whom he treated entirely as his own son, further endeared him to her. In early July, as fireflies danced in the twilight outside their cabin, Grace gave birth to their daughter, Emily Rose Evans. The labor was shorter and easier than with William, and Preston once again remained by her side throughout the ordeal, his strength supporting her when her own faltered. "She's beautiful," Preston whispered as he held his newborn daughter for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Look what we did, Grace." Emily had Grace's delicate features and, to everyone's amusement, a shock of reddish blonde hair that matched Preston's exactly. "No one will ever question who her father is," Dr. Crawford remarked with a chuckle as he completed his examination of mother and child. William, too young to understand fully what was happening, was nevertheless fascinated by the tiny newcomer. With careful supervision, Grace allowed him to gently touch his sister's hand, beaming with pride as he patted the baby carefully. "Gentle, William," Preston instructed, guiding the boy's hand. "This is your sister, Emily. You're her big brother now." The family of 4 settled into new routines, with Preston taking on more care of William to allow Grace to focus on nursing Emily. The challenge of balancing 2 children under a year apart was significant, but they faced it together, finding joy in the chaos and growth of their unconventional family. In August, Preston received a letter that brought unexpected news. His cousin from Colorado, whom he hadn't seen in years, had died in a mining accident, leaving a modest inheritance to Preston as his only living relative. The sum, while not extravagant, was enough to allow significant improvements to the ranch. "We could build a proper house," Preston suggested as they discussed how to use the funds. "Something with more room for the children to grow." Grace agreed enthusiastically, and they began planning a new home to be built adjacent to the cabin. Preston hired workers from Silver Reef to help with the construction, and by late fall, the framework was complete, a spacious two-story house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen and dining area, and even a small parlor where Grace could receive guests. "It's like a palace," she marveled as they walked through the partially completed rooms. "Only the best for my family," Preston replied, his arm around her waist as William toddled ahead of them, exploring the new space. The new house was completed just before Christmas, 1879, and the family moved in with great celebration. Preston had spared no expense on comfortable furnishings, including a proper bed for William and a beautiful cradle for Emily handed down from one of the families in Silver Reef. Their second Christmas together was even more joyous than the first. William, now a year old, was delighted by the colorful paper and ribbons, while Emily, at 5 months, observed the proceedings with wide-eyed wonder from Grace's lap. They exchanged simple gifts, practical items for the new house, toys for the children, and handmade tokens of affection for each other. "I have one more surprise," Preston announced after the gifts had been opened and the children were occupied with their new toys. He retrieved a document from his coat pocket and handed it to Grace. She opened it, her eyes widening as she read. "Preston, this is adoption papers," he confirmed. "If you approve, I'd like to legally adopt William as my son. He already has my name, but I want to make it official in every way possible." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks as she nodded emphatically. "Nothing would make me happier. You've been his father in every way that matters since the day he was born." The adoption was finalized in early 1880, with William legally becoming Preston's son in the eyes of the law as well as in their hearts. Though the boy was too young to understand the significance of the event, Grace and Preston marked the occasion with a special family dinner and private celebration. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm for the Evans family as the years passed. The ranch prospered under Preston's careful management, growing to become one of the most successful operations in the Silver Reef area. Grace, in addition to raising their children, began teaching at the local school 1 day a week, sharing her love of reading and mathematics with the town's youngsters. William grew into a sturdy, thoughtful boy with his mother's gentle nature and a deep interest in the workings of the ranch. By age 5, he was Preston's constant shadow, learning about cattle and horses with an enthusiasm that made his father proud. Emily developed into a spirited, strong-willed child with fiery red gold curls and a quick smile. Preston adored his daughter shamelessly, unable to deny her anything despite Grace's occasional admonishments about spoiling the child. In 1883, when William was 5 and Emily 4, the Evans family welcomed another addition, a second son they named Daniel James. Despite the painful memories associated with James Hathaway, Grace had suggested the middle name as a way of acknowledging the past that had ultimately led to their happiness. "Without him, as terrible as his actions were, I would never have found you," she explained to Preston. "And I want our children to know that even painful beginnings can lead to beautiful outcomes." Preston had agreed, touched by her wisdom and generosity of spirit. Daniel proved to be a good-natured baby, with Preston's blue eyes and Grace's dark hair, a perfect blend of both parents. As the children grew, Grace and Preston made sure they understood the unique circumstances of their family. William was told, in age-appropriate terms, that Preston had chosen to be his father out of love, making their bond special rather than diminished. Far from causing confusion or hurt, this knowledge seemed to strengthen the relationship between father and firstborn son. "You picked me?" William had asked at age 7, his eyes wide with wonder. "I sure did," Preston confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Best choice I ever made." In 1887, nearly 10 years after Preston and Grace's hasty wedding in the Silver Reef Church, the family gathered for a special celebration. The original church had been replaced by a larger structure, and Preston had arranged for a renewal of their vows, this time with their children in attendance, and no scandalized whispers from the congregation. Grace wore a beautiful cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with 9-year-old William proudly escorting her down the aisle. Emily, at 8, scattered flower petals before them, while 4-year-old Daniel carried the rings on a small pillow, his face solemn with the importance of his task. Preston, handsome in a new suit ordered specially from Salt Lake City, watched his wife approach with the same wonder he had felt on that fateful day a decade earlier. But now, instead of uncertainty and impulse driving his actions, it was decade-deep love and absolute certainty. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Miller began, the same minister who had married them initially, now graying and more stooped but still serving the Silver Reef congregation. "We are gathered here to witness the renewal of vows between Preston and Grace Evans, who came together under unusual circumstances, but have built a marriage of exceptional strength and devotion." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Preston and Grace had written their own vows this time, speaking from hearts full of the love and experiences they had shared. "Grace," Preston said, his voice steady and sure, "10 years ago, I made you a promise based on little more than instinct and a belief in doing what was right. Today, I make you that same promise with the knowledge of who you truly are, the strongest, kindest, most loving woman I've ever known. You've given me a family, a purpose, and a love I never dreamed possible. I vow to continue loving you and our children with everything I am for all the days of our lives." Grace, tears shining in her eyes, responded in kind. "Preston, you offered me your name when I had lost all hope. You gave me protection when I was vulnerable, respect when others showed scorn, and eventually, a love so deep and true that it healed every broken piece of my heart. I stand here today not out of necessity or gratitude, but because there is nowhere else I would rather be than by your side. I love you more with each passing day, and I vow to continue loving you through whatever life brings us." The children watched with varying degrees of understanding, William solemn and thoughtful, Emily dabbing at her eyes in imitation of the adult women present, and Daniel fidgeting slightly, but remaining admirably in place beside his siblings. After the ceremony, the entire town of Silver Reef joined in a celebration at the Evans Ranch. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, and a small band played lively tunes for dancing. Preston and Grace moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from neighbors who had long since forgotten the scandal of their beginning. Mrs. Harriet Boone, now in her 70s, but still a formidable presence in town society, approached them with a rare smile. 10 years, she remarked. I confess I gave you 6 months at best when you first married. I've never been happier to be proven wrong. Thank you for your confidence, Mrs. Boone, Preston replied dryly, making Grace stifle a laugh. The older woman's expression turned serious. In all my years, I've seen few marriages with the genuine devotion you two share. It's a lesson for us all about looking beyond appearances and conventional beginnings. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the property, Preston led Grace onto the dance floor for a waltz. They moved together with the easy familiarity of longtime partners, their steps perfectly matched. "Happy?" Preston asked softly, his hand warm against the small of her back. "Completely," Grace assured him, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Though I can't help thinking about that day in the church. I was so certain my life was over. And instead it was just beginning," Preston finished for her. Grace nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder as they continued to dance. "I never thanked him, you know." "Who?" "James," she clarified, "for leaving me at the altar. It was the most painful moment of my life, but without it, I wouldn't have you, or our beautiful family, or any of this happiness." Preston considered this for a moment. "I suppose we both owe him a debt then." "Though I'm not sure I'm generous enough to thank the man." Grace laughed softly. "Perhaps not, but I am thankful nonetheless for every twist and turn that brought us here." As the celebration continued around them, William approached, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best but determined in his mission. "May I cut in?" he asked formally, just as Preston had coached him. Preston stepped back with a bow, yielding his place to his son. "Of course, young man. Your mother would be honored." Grace beamed with pride as William carefully led her in a simple dance, his face a study in concentration as he tried to remember the steps Preston had taught him. From the sidelines, Preston watched his wife and firstborn son, his heart full to bursting. Emily soon joined him, tugging on his hand. "Dance with me, Papa," she demanded, her red curls bouncing as she hopped from foot to foot. Preston swept her up into his arms, twirling her around as she squealed with delight. Daniel, not to be left out, ran over to join them, and soon Preston was attempting to dance with both younger children at once, much to the amusement of onlookers. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, the Evans family gathered on the porch of their home. William and Emily, tired from the excitement, leaned against their parents while Daniel had fallen asleep in Grace's lap. "I'd say that was a successful day," Preston remarked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. "Perfect," she agreed. Looking out over the ranch that had become so much more than a place to live, it had become the foundation of their family, and the setting for their extraordinary love story. As stars appeared in the clear Utah sky, Preston pressed a gentle kiss to his wife's temple. "Who would have thought," he mused, "that the most impulsive decision of my life would turn out to be the wisest one I ever made?" Grace smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head can catch up." "Well, my heart and head are in full agreement now," Preston assured her. "I love you, Grace Evans. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." "And I love you," she replied softly. "My cowboy who said I do when another man wouldn't." Together, they watched the moon rise over the land they had cultivated. Their children nestled around them, a family born not of conventional beginnings, but of courage, compassion, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of circumstances into something enduring and true.